Ghastly news tonight. If you held hope that Jeb Bush was not like his brother, that he was not a leader who would take us down another rabbit hole like Iraq, give it up. I mean, really give it up. Jeb just told a group that W would be his go-to guy on the Middle East, that the man who called himself the decider will once again be back in action, that the people who brought us the most ridiculous foreign policy decision in modern history, that Ted Kennedy called the most important thing he ever voted against, is coming back to the political stage. Jeb says if you want to figure out his thinking on war in the Islamic world, think W. Why'd he do it? Because being a hawk is the one thing that unites Republican presidential candidates these days? Because he's not getting traction on Common Core and thinking positive about illegal immigration? Whatever the reason, the idea that we could get another president along the lines of W is frightening. Does this mean Dick Cheney's got his bags packed and is heading back into the war room? I'm joined right now by MSNBC political analyst David Corn of Mother Jones and Jonathan Capehart of the Washington Post. You're chuckling, David, because you and I can't believe the poetry of this. As I said, Jeb Bush has just named his brother, former President George W. Bush, as his lead thinker on foreign policy when it comes to Israel. And as the Washington Post pointed out, quote, embracing George W. Bush as a foreign policy confidant is a risky and unexpected move. While the former president's approval ratings have improved since he left office in 2009, his foreign policy legacy, particularly the long war in Iraq, remains deeply unpopular. It got that right. According to a CBS New York Times poll conducted last year, 75% of the American people, three-quarters of us, say that the Iraq war wasn't worth it. By the way, Bush dropped this bombshell at a Tuesday night fundraiser with Republican mega donor Paul Singer. Up until now, Jeb Bush had been trying to distance himself from his family. He's been careful to emphasize that he's his own man ever since he first expressed an interest in running for president. Here he was.
What impact does having a father and a brother who have served as president weigh on your decision to potentially run?
If I was to go beyond the consideration of running, I would have to deal with this and turn this fact into an opportunity to share who I am. It doesn't bother me a bit to be proud of them and love them, but I know for a fact that if I'm going to be successful going beyond the consideration, then I'm going to have to do it on my own.
So David Cornett idea is dead now. He wants to be W on Israel and the Middle East. Why'd he do it? Political, ideological, desperation? What would you call it?
I think it was a mistake. I think it's inexplicable. It's like saying if he's elected, he'll appoint Bernie Madoff to run the SEC. And it's not just, George W. That he's talked about advising him. In February, shortly after that speech you just showed, he released a list of his foreign policy advisors. 17 out of the 21 served in the George W. Bush administration and helped give us the Iraq War, including your favorite Paul Wolfowitz. And so he's not showing any distance on the Iraq War. And he didn't even, on that list, conspicuous in absence were people like Condi Rice, who might have been a little bit more skeptical. So here we have Jeb Bush. I don't think it was purposeful, but I think the fact is there that he's tied to these people and to his brother, who gave us one of the biggest foreign policy mistakes of all time. And listen, whether Hillary's campaign does it or not, there'll be super PACs out there that will spend a lot of money, whatever George W.'s approval ratings are at the time, reminding people about this war and also about the economic crash that happened on his watch.
Sure. Hey, Jonathan, I know the country, people are very pro-Israeli generally in this country, and that's a part of our culture, but there's something different going on now. People may be hawkish in general terms now, some people, like, well, let's really show those people. But nobody wants a war again. Nobody wants to go in there on the ground like W did so stupidly, and Cheney pushed him in it. By the way, my favorite, or you mean sarcastically favorite, is Dick Cheney, and always will be, okay, of all the hawkish guys out there. Jonathan, why would he say, I want to do again, or listen to the guy who got us into that rabbit hole, that hopeless situation in Iraq that we're never quite able to get out of?
Yeah, I'm not sure. After saying that he's going to be his own man and that we have to judge him on his own merits, I'm not sure why he would do it or what benefit it would gain him. Look, it makes sense. when you think about it, why he would turn to his brother for advice, because his brother has actually sat in the Oval Office, has had to make decisions about war and peace, about how to deal with other nations. No, I know, I get that. He made the wrong decisions. That's correct.
He's a good negative example.
He's a negative example, but again, it's someone who has experience in the job. But the problem that he has is the country still remembers that war and hates that war, whether they're Democrats or Republicans. Republicans still do not like George W. Bush all that much, not because of the war, because of what they view as the profligate spending during his administration, when they wanted a conservative who was going to get into the White House and cut. Instead, the deficit grew exploded under President Bush. And so Jeb Bush is in a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation here.
Well, the polls in Iowa and New Hampshire paint two different pictures of Jeb Bush's candidacy right now. A Quinnipiac University poll of Iowa Republicans this week found that Jeb Bush had slipped into 7th place with support from just 5% of likely caucus goers. That's way at the bottom. And a new WMUR poll shows Jeb Bush just narrowly leading the pack up in New Hampshire with 15%, which is not very good if you consider the fact, come back to you, David, that the President Reagan went up there. I mean, Bill Clinton went up there. The leaders tend to win in New Hampshire. And the fact is that he's been around a long time, Jeb Bush. The fact that he's barely ahead up there and way in the back in Iowa means he's got to push a couple buttons now. He's pushing the hawk button.
But, I don't think that's going to win him votes. There are other hawks in the race, whether it's Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz in a way. And I think he has he's hitting this early ceiling. If you talk to people who do focus groups of Republican voters, a lot of them just say, we just don't want another Bush. I'm not even sure it's because of the war. They just don't think that fondly of the last one, and they want something new. So I think wrapping his arms around George W. Bush isn't going to gain him ground in New Hampshire or Iowa. I think it was a mistake. I think he made a very, very big mistake, as he has done on occasions. He's been okay as a campaigner the past few months, but when his book came out a year and a half ago and he tried to talk about immigration, Jeb Bush made many mistakes. So I think he just kind of lost it the other night.
Clearly it may just be a case of pandering. It was before a Jewish group, and I think it was probably a bunch of hawks in the room, I assume, from the way he addressed them in this regard. And I'm just wondering, because like a lot of voters, I mean, progressives might even agree with this, or moderate progressives, it's nice to know that when there's a general election, then you can imagine voting for either of the two candidates. But here Jeb is signing up now saying, I'm not anywhere near the middle like you thought I was. I'm not something like a thoughtful Republican who thought we made some mistakes in the past. Even my brother made them. But I'm just signing on. I'm just signing on to the mistakes of the past. So how can you even think of voting for me? That's what it's doing to me, Jonathan.
But you know what? The venue where Jeb Bush said this is what I find interesting. He said this at a fundraiser, a private event, where people who were at the event told someone in the press, if he had done this in a foreign policy speech, if he had done this during an interview, say on Hardball, then I think it would have a much more explosive effect. He could effectively come back out and say, well, no, I'm my own man. And the more talks about this, actually maybe think that David's right, that this was a mistake, or Jeb Bush was hoping that this wouldn't get out.
Yeah, it was working a particular audience, which politicians do, by the way. They work the audience that makes more than 47%. They go, or Obama going out to San Francisco with a very wealthy crowd up on Nob Hill, talking about people who cling to their guns and religion. He thought that was an elite, cultural, secular crowd. And the wonderful thing about social media, David, is that you can't keep secrets.
Well, you can't. And the fact that he said this is out, that the Bush campaign is not denying he said it because they know he said it. And I think there are a lot of other ways to pander to a group of rich donors on the issue of Israel, other than saying George W. Bush is my #1 advisor, because I'm not even sure that crowd is going to like that.
By the way, I would think that group would believe in intelligence and sophistication, and they would think, I want some more thinking, hard-headed thinking like we got from W. I mean, give me a break. I don't care how hawkish you are. You don't think W knew what was going on.